It's Monday morning. Our special guest in this session, of course, on Mondays is Aaron Ling Johanson. He is the minority leader in the House of Representatives. You're going to get that live soon. Good morning, Aaron.
Good morning.
Where were you for the big spectacle?
I was at two parties myself.
You know, I got to tell you, one friend of mine who's got a very droll sense of humor was at our house. And right towards the end of the game, he says, you know what? We got invited to another party. We're going to go there just in case the Broncos are leading there. Mm-hmm. Were you in a crowd expecting the Broncos to win the football game?
I was in two crowds, both hopeful that the Broncos would win.
Is that right? Yeah.
Double the disappointment for both.
You know, one thing there was controversial, and I don't know if you got this or not. Everybody, obviously watches the ads and watches the halftime, which I thought was, pretty interesting. But there was Coca-Cola had a couple of commercials. One of them was pretty interesting. And it was the America the Beautiful being sung in a lot of languages.
I did see that, yeah.
And it was amazing because the reactions on that split. I mean, the entire country split. One said, good on you, Coca-Cola, because we're a diverse melting pot. And the others are saying, borders, language, and culture. You're going to come here, sing our song in our language. In any case, it's being talked about, right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean, I saw it myself, and, you can recognize the tune, but I spent most of the commercial trying to ascertain what languages.
Yeah, me too. Me too. Matter of fact, that shows us how multilingual.
How diverse the country is.
Yeah, it is. That being said, I was very interested in your party, the Republican Party, making some platform adjustments to show people, particularly Hispanics, that the Republican Party is a lot more simpatico with their culture and their beliefs than the Democrat Party. Is this a big issue, do you think, for the party and for politics in general?
Sure. I mean, I think at the national level, the party is having to go through a rebranding because they're increasingly painted, and I think unfairly, but increasingly painted as narrow. It certainly isn't reflected when you look at Republicans here in Hawaii, but that's the national dialogue, and it's a good dialogue for any political party to have to figure out how to be more encompassing and how to appeal to a broader swath. You don't just win, but you make good policy.
Aaron, I'm so glad you brought that up because I do want to talk about what's going on in the legislature this week, and I know that every week is in 1 week more important than the next. I know we got a lot of stuff that's going on. However, I want to tell you that there are a lot of people here in Hawaii, conservatives, Republicans, independents, that are really getting a mixed message from the local Republicans these days between spur group that's been that looks like they're the Republican Party, but apparently they're not, and the Tea Party, which looks like they've got a bunch of Republican principles, and I don't know if they do or not. And it doesn't seem to me that that's the same thing going on nationally. Do you think that we are we broken? Is the Republican Party is it Humpty Dumpty fell off the wall and cracked it, or can it be fixed? You're an elected representative and certainly represent with the Republican delegation in the House, most of which are GOP. What can you tell us, about some of the things that, in your own opinion, are going on, and what can be done to make adjustments to have everybody taking a look at similarities rather than differences?
Yeah, I don't think we're broken, but I think there's definitely a time of soul-searching both nationally and also locally. Typically, if you're not the dominant party in the national case, we don't control the White House or the Senate, and here locally, no branch of government is controlled by Republicans.
Yeah.
You typically go through that soul-searching, and it's after 8 years of the Lingle administration when everybody got used to having a Republican governor and somebody who was a very strong head of the party and a good one. But you naturally go through that when you're out of power, and I think that's part of the political cycle in our nation's history as well as in the state's history. So I think it's important for people to focus on, when you agree 70 or 80% of the time.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, look at families. Look at the husbands and wives, and look at brothers and sisters. They don't agree on everything, but they're still in other words, but they still have the familial connection with each other. They're still a family.
And I think sometimes what we often forget in politics is that the point of politicking is still to achieve a better quality of life for everyone. It's not just for esoteric political gamesmanship.
But Aaron, you say one thing that I'd almost want to argue with you a little bit, because I have the opportunity during my regular day to talk to a lot of our hosts, in stations across the country, albeit most of them conservative. I want to tell you that there is more than a possibility. It is almost a probability that the Senate's power will shift. I mean, there are that many seats up for grabs, and there are that many front runners.
The Democrats have many more to defend.
Yeah, and that being said, from what I understand, and you're probably a better historian or student of history than I am in this area. It's not uncommon in the second term of a contentious presidency to have the balance of power in both houses shift.
Sure. I mean, you saw it happen in 2006.
Exactly.
With President Bush. Both the House and the Senate switched and became controlled by the opposition party.
Yeah. Now, that being said, things still went on. I mean, the business of the country still went on. It was not as contentious. I mean, here we are 6 years into the Obama administration with Bush still being the whipping boy.
Having been at the White House.
Yeah, you were there, right?
When the switch occurred, I don't know that I can agree that it wasn't as contentious. It's always difficult when you have changes in power, and it's difficult when when the public has decided one way or another that the fault is assigned to a particular party or a particular leader.
What about some states during this transition, and you've seen some and I've seen some, that did some individual soul searching and say, we can't have just one delegation. Mm-hmm. We have to have both sides represented. We have not had that happen in the Obama administration in the Washington delegation.
Mm-hmm. Well, particularly for our local delegation, what's interesting, and this is where being a student of history has been helpful. Hawaii has always been a one-party town. It was so under the Republicans, and it is not exactly so, but still largely so under Democratic control. And, we did have Charles DeJoux in there for a moment where the delegation actually had some semblance of balance, but it's just not – it goes over as a better message in many other states where they're used to seeing divided government and more balance in their delegation than it does here. You know
what's interesting about that, and I'm glad you mentioned that, because I remember when Charles DeJoux would spend time with us regularly about what was going on. And I hope that we have the opportunity again. I hope that, Charles, if you're listening this morning, that you take a look, because we do need balance. And one thing that I can say is part of our delegation now is realizing that there is some subtle, tsunami going on the mainland. Mm-hmm. And there's, I think some of our elected officials in Washington, particularly Tulsi, appears to be reaching across the table to start making bonds with others. And I think that Dan Inouye was a great example of that with Ted Stevens, right?
Yeah, and that's strategic and very smart and very helpful to Hawaii, because if you're not in the same party, which bonds you with some of the other people, then at least if you have personal relationships with them, you're still able to capitalize on that sometimes for your state's benefit. Okay, we got plenty more to come, including your opportunity to jump in and join us. Aaron Johanson is here, and you can be too. 296-KHNR is the number. Okay, so how pumped was everybody yesterday at Bruno Mars in the Super Bowl? Gangnam Style. And it was kind of neat of them showing the video from the Aloha Bowl. And what was also neat, Aaron, and I don't know if you heard about this or not, but, we just went through that tense moment up at Roosevelt High School, which is where, of course, Bruno Mars went to school. Yeah. Actually, I was watching with someone who went to school with him.
Oh, is that right? That was pretty cool. Yeah. Did they know him? Did they remember him?
He was a few years younger.
Yeah.
Apparently, Bruno Mars is not his real name.
No, it's Hernandez. Yeah, and
I just never thought about it till.
Yeah, exactly. I can actually, I tell you how old I feel, because I watched this guy performing, and I remember when I had a television show years back called Portraits of Paradise. I did a story on a doo-wop group, which was his father's group, and he was a 6 or 7 year old Elvis impersonator, same hairdo.
Yeah.
And here he is now. But you know what?
If it ain't broke, don't fix it. Right?
Yeah, exactly. And by the way, it just seems like we have this other opportunity. And those of you that are waiting for concert tickets, hang on to your wallets, because here it comes. Okay. Speaking about hanging on to your wallets, there are a number of measures that I know that we should be discussing that are being looked at by the legislature right now, some of which are going to cost us more money, and some of which, under the guise of maybe looking like they're going to save us money, really or not. Are you nervous about any particular bills right now and what they might mean financially?
I think one of the foremost bills that's on people's minds, especially for business, but also for the consumer and the wage earner, is the raise in the minimum wage. That some form of it is definitely going to percolate throughout the legislature. We haven't seen one in the House side, but there was a hearing last week, at the end of last week, for the Senate version, which now goes to the Ways and Means Committee.
I'm a little bit worried because I don't think that a lot of people really understand what the minimum wage is and how many people are really on it or not on it. And I can tell you one thing, that nationally, and I guess even here locally, I think it was Senator He here that was pointing out the inequities in the minimum wage, in his opinion, and home ownership, when it didn't look to me like somebody that's earning the minimum wage can afford a mortgage anywhere, let alone in Hawaii. So, I mean, isn't that kind of almost like a scare tactic?
I don't know if it's a scare tactic, but unfortunately, it is a huge indictment of our cost of living here, that everything is so expensive. And I continue to advocate that, I'm glad we're looking at the minimum wage, but I think we also need to be looking at the root causes of the problem. And those root causes belong and are all associated with the high cost of living. And we can bring that down. We don't necessarily need to accept that it's just going to stay that way. You know,
Aaron, over the years that I've been doing this, there's a lot of people that think we are land short in Hawaii, that we can't grow our own food, that we can't do a lot of things. When landowners will tell you the opposite is true, that we do have arable, good land that we can still use. And when you talk about cost of living, when I got a real impassioned email today from a guy on Lanai, and it was about people coming from other islands to Lanai and catching their fish. And it's a big deal. But what he was talking about is milk is $6 a gallon there. And is it any wonder that we have a misconception? Oh, it's freight, or oh, it's transport costs. What are we doing at the Republican level or at the legislative level to encourage other than tourist development in Hawaii so that we have a backup?
Sure. I mean, I think there's a lot of proposals for economic diversification. You see a lot of talk nowadays of aerospace development. There's still some high tech, maybe not as much as there was during the Act 221 days, but and diversified agriculture, as well as aquaculture. All these things are typically talked about every legislative session. But if we could go back to the cost of living, people don't realize that in most other states, food and medicine are tax exempt. They're not
right off the bat.
You pay the general excise tax on that, which hurts the poor and the middle class the most because they're least able to pay for their bare necessities. So, very regressive tax in our general excise tax, which is equivalent to about an 11 or 12% sales tax.
Is there a way, Aaron, to restructure the GET so that some areas may be luxury items where you have to pay a little bit more? If you can afford it, maybe it's worth it. And when you can take food and clothing off the table for people that can't afford it.
Yeah, I think that the trick is to find a way to recoup, and you can do it either by reducing government expenses, or
that part.
Or by growing the economy so that you ultimately have more net tax revenue. But people always talk about it's too big of a hole to get rid of or to exempt food and medicine. But, those are the bare necessities that people need to live. And I think we need to find ways that make it work.
I think that there have been moves I remember many moves in that in the past. And one was to eliminate it completely, and the other is to substantially reduce it. I would think that a plan to come up with substantially reducing it would be looked at a little bit better, because I think there are a lot of people that are just plain panicking. Wow, that's where most of the taxation comes from. If we don't tax food and medicine and clothing, where are we going to get our money?
Yeah, there's a bunch of other ways, and we certainly are not awash in extra dollars. But no, at the same token, no one has extra money really to just be paying to government just because.
On that subject, I know that there's a great deal of sparring going on right now in the Democrat Party for the gubernatorial election coming up between, is the saving of money for real or is it not? And I do know that there's a lot of people on the Republican side that are saying, you know what, there is a surplus, but it ain't $800 million.
Yeah, definitely not.
Yeah, and so, and yet it seems
it's a surplus that could evaporate if we had one bad economic cycle or there was just a downturn.
I was just going to say the Council on Revenues can put a kibosh on that in one report.
Yeah, I mean they eviscerated 30 to 40 million in the last report because they just revised their projection downward.
Boy, that's not calming to somebody that's looking for something out there. But I think that we talk about this all the time, and before we talk about reduction in government, I do know that there are many, many people out there that are looking for a checks and balance system, a better auditing system, because some of the very programs that cost us a lot aren't being managed. There was a great story, and I'm sure you reacted the same way I did the other day, about somebody really banging on it, either collecting death benefits benefits after long time after somebody was dead, or just taking advantage of all the government programs to live pretty high on the hog.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, unfortunately, we don't design government often very effectively. So, when you try to achieve efficiencies and just maximum bang for your buck and make sure that the people who you really intend for the service are getting it, you often find that there are people taking advantage.
I think that many times that we that are opposed to these programs coverage are rubber stamped as being dispassionate or uncaring or greedy. Mm-hmm. And when actual fact, these programs, many of which were contrived by Republicans, were contrived to help people that needed it, mm-hmm. but to discourage people from cheating.
Yeah, and I think in order to ensure that the people who really need it, take for instance, some of the most vulnerable, whether it's children or seniors, mm-hmm. actually really get the service, and the people who really qualify for it, we have to make sure to cut down on the waste and the fraud and the abuse so that the intended audience is really the recipient of the needed service.
Those are the ones that are the most penalized. Mm-hmm. When they can look out and see somebody, say, in Section 8, housing, mm-hmm. with fancy cars and lots of jewelry and all kinds of expenditures and big screen TVs in the front yard, say, wait a minute. Maybe these people aren't telling the truth when they have to requalify. It's sometimes just once somebody gets in, it's hard to get them out.
Sometimes it's that. And to be honest, sometimes we just don't have very effective systems in government to make sure to be the check and balance on that. And that's one of the things that I think about every time we create a new program or expenditure. I still serve as vice chair of the Finance Committee, and I know that that's something the chair is also concerned about. So we look very seriously when people say, we've got a new program, we want to build this new division in the department. Yeah. Is it really going to be effective use of taxpayer dollars?
Yeah, that's a great point, and I'm glad to see that there's a little guilt even on the controlling party. We have more to come with Aaron Johanson. If you'd like to join us, it's easy. 296-KHNR is the number. Yep. Me and Rep. Johanson are sitting around here. Are we talking about politics? Nah. We're talking about Bruno Mars. Matter of fact, I'm watching on Hawaii News now as he's playing the drums to this particular song. And the kind of interesting thing, and Aaron was saying, if it wasn't his dedication to the legislature and to meeting with us as he does here on Monday mornings during the session, is he'd be down there at the Blazo. We just saw a shot of that. A lot of people waiting in line.
Yeah. A lot.
I would think that Uncle Tom Moffat right now would have cousins that he never even knew about calling him up.
Mm-hmm. I'm sure he does.
And saying,
he's probably a popular guy every time somebody comes to town.
Yeah. Okay, now, speaking about popular guys, before the break we were talking about things that could be done maybe to diversify our ag. And although we don't take, email from people, he does want to know what it is like trying to craft legislation that is beneficial to people. Like you mentioned, the tech credits have gone away. Mm-hmm. There are a lot of people that want them back. Mm-hmm. And I would imagine that some of that has to be resurrected just to make sense. But what about things that can be done for people that are willing to, say, grow food to eat?
Mm-hmm. Well, there's a lot of support for local farming, but local farmers don't have it very easy either. So typically some of the things that I've always thought and have been counseled by some of my colleagues, in fact, Representative Lauren Matsumoto is a fourth-generation family farmer. Mm-hmm. What typically has been very effective is sometimes feed subsidy credits, because feed is very expensive. And because,
of course, and it's mostly all imported. Right?
Mm-hmm. And since we don't always have the economies of scale, that's what ends up making it so expensive. But there's that. Also making sure that in terms of zoning, and that's more on the county level, but that we keep certain land zoned for ag so that it's accessible. And just making sure what you're starting to see at a cottage industry level is a lot of it percolating into the farmers markets.
I really love that. You're right. This whole concept of farm to table, it's actually real. Mm-hmm. It's not just cute words. But you see, the reason I ask that is because one of the things I remember when the Board of Water Supply trucks used to have water, man's greatest need on it. And I do know that your district just so happens to be sitting on a lot of our water.
It does.
And it must be an interesting thing for you to realize that, your voters are sitting on top of it's like liquid gold, really.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. And in fact, we have a farm, even though I'm in the urban core. Sumida Farms is the edge of my district.
I love those guys. Yeah.
They're doing great stuff with watercress.
I remember back in the day when I had my television show, we did a story on them, not just for the watercress, but for the smoked marlin that they did out there. There's 85 million marlin tails out there on the side of the building. But, it sort of shows that it's like the little engine that could, right? I mean, we've seen not industry, but development happen right around that place, and it's right in the middle. They must sometimes have to,
center.
Yeah, exactly. They're just amongst all that retail. But I do think that there's a lot of people, and consequently, also, Aaron, maybe we could touch on this a little bit. I know there are a lot of neighbor islands that are looking at GMO and bills and this and that. And I do know that that's a big player in ag. Are there any particular bills that you have thoughts one way or the other on that might affect labeling and things? And do you think it's time that we do actually label our foods just so that we know what we're eating?
I think one of the things that we've gotten a ton of communication on, particularly emails, these past 2 weeks is there was a bill authored by the vice chair of the Agricultural Committee called Right to Farm. And while it doesn't
to Farm.
Yeah, while it doesn't specifically address GMOs, it basically does articulate in a bill form that there is a right to farm, that people inherently have a right to farm. That was signed by a lot of members of the House. It's not going to get a hearing, as I understand it, from the chair of Agriculture. But that's generated a lot of attention. Certainly, labeling continues to be at the forefront. And I think what is difficult is a matter of trying to figure out, is the federal government at the congressional level going to mandate something so that all companies end up complying at once in one uniform fashion, or are states going to deal with it in a piecemeal fashion, and then it's up to distributors how they
Some of which are taking a very proactive move, right? Some guys are just saying that, look, this is GMO, here it is. Same thing with fish labeling. We had John Mizuno the other day talking about the bill that's going forward to protect labeling for local fish. Same thing with local product of any kind, right? I mean, look at what happened to those all of those farmers, on the Big Island that just said, hey, Kona coffee has got to be Kona coffee.
Right, right. Yeah. And, that's so inherent, besides just the health issues, is the branding and just the truth and sort of marketing.
Remember what it cost. Tobacco companies had to put on all their cigarettes a long time ago. We want you to buy these, but it's going to kill you.
Yeah,
I mean, in so many ways.
Yeah. Time in the
US. And obviously there's any number of people that now look at labeling as being it's a mandatory thing. Yet, how many people do you actually see at the supermarket that are reading the labels? I happen to see it a lot. And I think it's primarily younger people that are really saying, do I want my children to have this? If I can't pronounce something, I want to know sort of what it is.
Yeah, and you can see it, the generational shifts. I mean, for the generations that grew up either with stories or actually experienced the Great Depression, those generations tend to be, they just want to have food on the table and tend to be less concerned. But as you get younger and subsequent generations have had the luxury of being choosier consumers,
what I'm worried about,
to look for more information.
What I'm worried about is the perception, because it's locally, it must be more expensive. And maybe that sometimes these local guys are talking about labeling because they really want you to know that there's stuff coming from other places that is economically killing them. They can't afford to compete with, but it's GMO stuff rather than farm fresh stuff.
Well, and I think the real thing that people need to assess when they're looking at agriculture and going into farming is, does it economically make sense in Hawaii? If if it's going to be able to be grown at some equatorial country abroad for much cheaper, it's probably going to have a difficult time surviving here. But there are things that are grown here that
I was
really
going to say,
are a world leader.
Choose your crops.
Yeah, we grow over 90% of the world's seed corn. It doesn't feed us as corn, but it sure
goes out of here by the boatload.
Yeah, and it's feasible because it can be shipped at a low cost. But whether it's that or it's cacao or coffee or vanilla, there's a lavender farm that's doing really well.
Yeah, I was going to say some farm guys, some flower guys.
Yeah,
what's
specialty
interesting?
Crops do really well here.
And on the subject of specialty crops, it wouldn't be fair if I didn't ask you about Rita Cabanilla has come out with, and a lot of people are confused as to exactly what that is.
Yeah.
She spent some time with us the other day, and I happen to know that it's a bill calling for a group to look at something rather than immediately make token marijuana on the street legal for everybody. But isn't that something, in all fairness, that has to be looked at rather than from a humor standpoint that it needs to be looked at? I mean, are we looking at more and more states legalizing this substance, and can we really make a difference in taxes by growing marijuana and shipping it out of here?
Well, certainly post Colorado and some of the other states legalizing it or pursuing different decriminalization efforts, it's definitely going to continue to be a part of any state's dialogue, I think.
What about any bills that we don't know of that are still flopping around, dealing with not the economic side of it like Rep. Cabanilla, but just with decriminalizing? I know that I heard that there were several that were being looked at, but they may not get too much attention.
Yeah, I honestly don't think that they will, just because, at least in the House, the Speaker already enunciated that, let's wait and see what happens in Colorado and how they deal with all the issues that, just have yet to be experienced because nobody's really on the forefront as much as they are.
Okay, when we come back after our break, the question that I'm going to ask Rep. Johanson now is, do we really expect a whole lot to be done in an election year? And what are some of the goods, the bads, and the uglies of the fact that maybe a lot of people are hedging their bets, even about things like marijuana, because they don't want to upset the voting apple cart? And right before the break, I posed a question, and I don't know if Rep. Johanson can remember what it was. And the phones are all going, so we'll get to you guys as soon as we can at 296 KHNR. That would be 296-5467. Raphael's tied up, but he'll get to you pretty soon. And that's what you can do. You can call us. I think that there are a lot of people that are sitting on the edge of their seat wondering, okay, we got a lot of people that are going to be running for election. We got a lot of people that are drumming up the support to run for election. And maybe sometimes that's sort of in an off year, not a productive one. I don't really feel that way. I think there's some things out there that you guys are looking at that are pretty real.
I think so, too. And I think sometimes actually having an election every 2 years, as painful as it is for everyone in the House because it comes quickly, is good because it incentivizes people sometimes to do the right thing more than they might otherwise do.
There has to be a big decision-making process. And before we go talk to somebody about gun control and other phones that are ringing, let me ask you this. I mean, I know that you probably, Aaron, made lots of personal decisions in to do this and to run. And you certainly knew that you were going to be running in a minority party. And you certainly knew that when you got out there in your district that you were going to have to really make some statements to be heard. Now that you've had that experience and you're becoming, moved up the food chain, you're the spokesman for the party, how do you encourage people to say, okay, maybe it's not just an accident. It's that people need to serve because people need to serve.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's most compelling when you often represent the area you grew up in to the voter. And you don't have to, but that's part of the pitch that I make, that this area is special to me. My particular district is special to me because it's where I grew up and it's where my roots are. And that's what makes it a most special opportunity to be able to serve, because you're serving your grandma's friends or your parents'
which I
friends.
think is kind of interesting, because I know and politicians that have moved to a district to get elected, not necessarily represent that district, although that's what they end up trying to do. Okay,
and they can.
Yeah, let's go to the telephones. Aaron Johanson's in the house. We'll line you up in the order in which you're coming in. Don, you hang in there, and in the meantime, we go to Frank, who is in Salt Lake, with a question for you. Aaron, good morning, Frank.
Hey, good morning, guys.
Morning, Frank.
Hey, Representative Johanson. I was wondering, is the state have any plans to repeal any of the strict gun laws we have in this state? Because after all these stabbings recently in downtown, there's just people out there who can't protect themselves. If you're going to protect yourself, you're basically going to have to get in a knife fight. So I was wondering if there's going to be anything past this legislative session, if you know.
Or are there even any bills?
Yeah, that's what I meant.
Frank, good question. We'll get to that and get you off the air on it. That's I know that we are among the states that have the most restrictive gun laws for a reason.
We do.
And I do know that Frank's thought there is a good one. I mean, these things come up all the time, and I know they come up. Is there anything that in particular that surfaced this year or an election year? Not much.
Frank, unfortunately, I don't have good news to share with you on that front. There is not very much of a collective will in the State House or the State Senate to reduce any of Hawaii's fairly stringent gun regulations. And that almost, there are some things that never come up, and reduction of those restrictions very rarely come up. There isn't the collective appetite, I think, either by the House or the Senate.
Isn't there more than anecdotal information to substantiate that because we are such strict controls, there is less gun violence in Hawaii? It doesn't matter to somebody that's been involved in one, because they're not less, they're right in the middle of it. But, I mean, we really don't have as many shootings or things as some other states do, from what I understand.
Well, that's quintessentially at the heart of the debate between activists who want to see stringent controls in place and activists who want to see them reduced. And I think it depends what island you're on, too. I mean, there's a much higher usage of guns on the neighbor islands where there's a lot more hunting, and it's a part of more of the regular experience than here on Oahu, where most people have never participated in activity, recreationally that involves guns.
Sure, yeah. Okay, let's go next to Don out in Kaneohe, who joins us next. Hello, Don. Good morning. Welcome to the program.
Good morning. Thank you for taking my call.
Sure.
Question for the representative. Concern House Bill, I think it's 1762, about service animals being certification, because a lot of people will just bring dogs or anything on top of the bus or in restaurants, and we're not too sure if they're service animals or whatever, and there should be some kind of certification that proof that they are and what they do. What is going on with that bill? Do you know?
I have to confess that I haven't actually seen that bill in any of the committees that I sit on, so I may not have the most nuanced understanding of it. But I think there's a recognition that like you say, we need to make sure that our laws are in place to help those that really need the help, but also to make sure that it's not so overly broad that it gets in the way of people who do really use service help animals. And so I'm not sure about that particular bill, but I can always look more into it.
Don, I'm glad you called on that, because I want to make sure that Rep. Johanson knows. If I remember, you're visually impaired?
Yes.
Okay, now, what I'm thinking is that some of these people that have like a Chihuahua on their lap because it's a service animal, is this what you're talking about?
Yeah.
And what's your feeling about it?
I just wondering because, for people who are vision impaired or blind, they have their service animals.
Of course.
They have their vest on, on their animals and whatnot. But there's some people that just come on, for instance, on the bus, they have huge dogs, like a Great Dane, and they said,
I get you.
This is my service animal, and the operator can't question that, what is their disability and what, So it's a touchy situation, but there should be some clarification because you can just go on the internet and get a document that this is my service animal. And they just bring
Yeah, see, that's pretty interesting, right, Aaron? I mean, wouldn't that be another? I know that we don't like big government, but wouldn't that be somebody in government should say you have to have a Hawaii tag of some kind to prove you're a service animal?
And speaking of the internet, thanks to it, I'm able to look up the bill status for you. And
by the way, I want to interrupt Rep. Johanson, Don. It's so good to know, not only is he all over it tech-wise, but he can walk and chew gum at the same time. He hasn't missed a thing you're saying, but he's done his research.
Yeah, and unfortunately, I also have bad news on this front. The Human Services Committee did hear the bill last week on the 30th of January, but at that time they recommended that the bill would be deferred, which basically means they won't be taking
goodbye.
action.
Yeah.
But, if it's something that you and others in the community feel strongly about because it would help add some clarity to those who really need the service animals, you can always contact the Human Services Chair. Deferred doesn't mean it's dead. It means that it's probably not advancing this additional certification. But, certainly there's some merit to it. And so, you can call the Human Services Committee Chair.
Who would that be?
It's Representative Melly Carroll.
Oh, okay. I think I have her.
Yeah, and she makes the decisions about whether the bill advances or not.
Okay, thank you.
And thanks for your call. And I think that, that we should use the remaining minute here to explain what that procedure is. Because there's a lot of people, when they hear something's been tabled or deferred, it's because of what? 3,000 come up and 300 get heard and 5% of those get passed. I mean, there's a lot of people, a lot of interest.
Right, that's true.
Yeah.
But everyone in the public need not accept that just because a decision is made today means that it's that in perpetuity. Everybody in the public has the ability to influence the future, but you got to do so by actually talking to the people who control the fate of the bill.
What about, Aaron, the pecking order of the way it's done? I mean, for instance, all the committees, let's say that particular committee has deferred something. Could another committee say, well, we want to take a look at this, and so here's what we think, and then they send it back to the other committee?
Only if a committee waives their referral. So in order to ensure that there's a hearing process once a bill is introduced, it's assigned committee assignments based on its subject matter jurisdiction.
That's what I need you to point out. In other words, the first investigative committee is the one when it says a bill pertaining to that can be referred to that committee.
Right. So because this has to do with service animals, that's why it went to the Human Services Committee.
Right. Now, had it passed out of there, would it then have gone to judicial or finance or what? I mean, in other words, when it goes out of it doesn't matter. Well, not about that specific bill, but since he asked,
it would have gone to a subsequent committee. Usually, the latter committees are either judiciary or consumer protection. I mean,
that's what I'm thinking.
CBC.
It's CBC, because isn't it true that
committee.
one committee might have a great idea about a bill and send it to judiciary and say this is impossible to enforce, or it's or there is no enforcement, or it's not constitutional, or whatever.
Yeah, it's easiest to think of it almost as a siphon or a funnel rather. Everything starts off big and broad at a macro level about just the idea.
Got to go through the hourglass,
service.
right?
But once you get down to the final end of the bill, you're at a much narrower point.
So far, based on your experience, are there less, more, or about the same number of bills being looked at this year as there was last year?
There's actually more, which is
wow,
surprising.
That's surprising.
Yeah,
I was going to say, it's less because it's an election year.
Sometimes there's more because it's an election year.
Yeah. I was going to say that might be it. Is everybody sort of finally, and I think that a lot of people want to know this, we had this redistribution and redistricting and everything else. Are people sort of settling with that now? I mean, is it to a point where the challenges have gone away and this is the way it is?
Yeah, it's largely settled because the Supreme Court dismissed the case and dismissed the challenge to the reapportionment. So, in as much as I know, as someone who's not an attorney, we've sort of reached some finality, and these districts will be in place.
Gee, you're not an attorney? I thought everybody in your office, everybody in elected office is an attorney.
It's good to sometimes have elected officials who aren't attorneys.
Yeah, I should say. Well, I can tell you one thing. It's been an interesting transition, as you know. For the last several years, my rep has been our mutual friend Gene, and I want to tell you that I think that not only having him around as sort of a mentor for the process, but it shows a willingness in the party to create new leadership, and I think that Gene Ward's a good example of that. How often do you guys get together?
We see each other every day.
Yeah. I hope he has a red tie on to match yours today. Anyway,
I don't know if he's taken me up on my fashion sense.
Yeah. By the way, one thing that I wanted to ask Rep. Johanson about today, which we're going to save to next week because it's in his district. You get to go look at what?
The fuel tanks under Red Hill.
He gets to look at those fuel tanks under Red Hill, and next week we'll talk all about that. Thank you for being here.
Oh, thanks, Mike. Great to be here.